Hello everyone, and thank you for attending the webinar today. The focus of today's webinar is going to be on the Balance Scorecard and how we use it as an instructor. Now, I'm sure most of you are already familiar with what a Balance Scorecard is, but in case anybody isn't, a Balance Scorecard is essentially a management system that's used extensively in businesses, government, nonprofits, and essentially the goal is to align business activities to the strategy of the organization. The big difference between the Balance Scorecard and more traditional financial measures is that it also adds a non-financial performance measure that gives managers and executives a more balanced view of an organization. So instead of just financial, we also have things like internal business processes. Did we meet our customers' expectations? Are we investing in learning and growth? Things of that nature. So we're going to take a look at what the Balance Scorecard does and where we can access it on CAPSIM. I've just logged into kind of a demo course here, and the first thing I want to cover is that the Balance Scorecard is available by default to your students. It is one of the reports listed in this report availability area. So when you go into your course and you click on reports, there's an item for report availability. The default is that the scorecard is visible in round 1. So this isn't something that you need to do in order to make it available to students, but if there are reports that you wish to make visible or invisible to your students, you can always go to that report availability area that I just showed you. Now the Balance Scorecard actually shows up the Balance Scorecard shows up underneath Industry Scoring, Balance Scorecard. So once we go to the Balance Scorecard, we can access our teams, and then we'll see a score for each round that has been played for each team in our simulation. So we can click on any of these scores, and we can see the breakdown of how we arrived at the score that's displayed up here. Now this will give us a ranking that shows us how this team did for this particular round and also overall through this point in the simulation. So of course these are going to match up in round 1, and in this case it actually matched up in round 2 as well. But once we get to round 3, in this case we can see that this team was in the 77th percentile for that particular round, but overall they were in the 71st percentile through the end of round 3. Now, a few basics about the Balance Scorecard. It is out of 1,000 points. This is not something where I would ever expect a team to actually get anywhere close to 1,000 out of 1,000. The average team tends to get around 600 out of 1,000. So this is a tool that most instructors will curve the results based on their particular class. You could also take a similar approach if there are less than 8 rounds being played. Now, a couple items. One, I just wanted to mention that if there are some questions during the webinar, you can feel free to type those questions into the chat area. I will try to get to those in the second half of the webinar. If there are any specific questions about your industry that you're currently using in CAPSIM, those sorts of questions should go to your support rep here at CAPSIM, and we're happy to help you after the webinar. Any questions specific to the Balance Scorecard, I will, of course, attempt to answer all of those while this webinar is in progress. For the record, if you do need to call CAPSIM for support, you can always give us a call at 877-477-8787. You can also reach us at support@capsim.com. That's the email address for both professors and students whenever you need help with something. This webinar is being recorded, so you don't need to worry about taking notes. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm logged into a course under my account, but This setup should look familiar. Once we're logged into a course, we always land on our dashboard, but when we're ready to take a look at how the students are doing in the sim, we can go to this industry scoring area, and we'll find the Balance Scorecard off to the left-hand side. There's two reports here. There's My Teams, which is going to show us a breakdown of how our teams have done on each round of the simulation and overall through this point in the sim. And then there's also a report called the Top 10. The Top 10 is really just bragging rights, but it shows how our teams are doing for each round, and also it'll show our school, it'll show the professor, it will acknowledge the top 10% of teams from around the world from this past semester. So you'll see some schools with a lot of entries. In this case, we see a lot of University of Oregon, which is kind of a side effect of having so many students going through the simulation. But when you go through each round, you'll notice different standings, different schools being mentioned. I know we see North Arkansas College and Kennesaw State once we reach round 2. But you can always go through each of the tabs, see if we had a team that qualified. If in this particular round they were in the top 10%, they would be acknowledged on this report. And we try to keep this up to date by only monitoring the past semester. I believe it's 120 days. There's also this tab at the end. So we have 8 rounds of the simulation that will show us the breakdown for each individual round. There's also this recap, or round 9 percentile. The recap score is essentially your end of the simulation goals. So I know a question that I've been asked many times over the years by students is, why am I doing so poorly on this recap score? And what they need to keep in mind is that the objectives that are listed here are really aimed at once you've completed all 8 rounds of the simulation. So, for example, operating profit, to get full credit, we would need over 120 million in profit. If this simulation was only in round 1 or 2, of course, the students haven't had enough time to achieve that objective. The best advice I think you can give the students is to focus on the goals for each individual round. You'll also notice there's a goal for things like profit for each round as they progress through the simulation. If they're doing a good job of meeting these objectives during the sim, everything on the recap will essentially take care of itself. So I tend to tell students, pay attention to what's on the recap. It's definitely important. This is where we want to be when the simulation is over. But at the same time, if you haven't had enough time to do well in that category, I wouldn't panic about the number of points that you've earned until we get closer to the end of the sim. Once we get to round 7 or 8, it's time to start paying a little closer attention to the recap. Let me see. Another question that I know I've been asked many times over the years is, how do I use this report if I'm not playing all 8 rounds in the simulation? And for assessment purposes, I would typically just look at the overall ranking through this point in the sim. That'll give us an idea of how this team performed, through 7 rounds or through 6 rounds in the simulation. We'll have the ranking for the round and also overall, which reflects how they've done through this point in the sim. So you can use those overall rankings to help with grading. You can also use this scorecard to help in terms of where does this team really need improvement. So, just at a glance, I can see this team at a 0 out of 8 for leverage. If I click on that category, we'll see the no credit, partial credit, and full credit scoring ranges. So right now I'm looking at round 6. First thing I would need to identify is did this student have, too much or too little for leverage? It looks like this company actually has almost no debt. Leverage is at 1.1. So if they were trying to improve on the scorecard, they could take on some more debt. They could pay down some of that excess equity, improve their leverage, and earn more points on the scorecard. This sort of logic applies to any area where we see the team struggling. If I go to plant utilization, where they were earning 0 out of 5, I can see that to get full credit, they would need 100% to 180% for plant utilization. Obviously, there's an issue here. Either this team is building everything they can, they're up around 200%, or more likely they have some idle assets right now that are not being used. They're collecting dust. It's overall hurting the productivity of their company as these assets simply depreciate and kind of chip away at the bottom line. So any area where we see teams struggling, we can bring that to their attention. I'm not seeing many points in learning and growth in this particular sim, so the student has kind of shied away from investing in HR and TQM. That's an area where they could quite easily start investing some more funds and see some improvement on the scorecard. Let's see, some other questions I've been asked about the scorecard. One instructor wants to know if they can customize the metrics. There is no customizing the Balance Scorecard, not in Capstone or Foundation. This is how we measure performance around the globe. So everybody is playing by the same set of rules on the scorecard. That's how we're able to generate these rankings for each round and overall. So it's not something you can edit, but you can always click on each of these categories and see exactly how it's scored. They can see what that category is. It will always define what we're looking at to the students and then explain why we ended up at the score we did. Let's see. So what I've showed you so far has been a quick look at the professor side of things. Right now I'm logged in as the instructor, so I went to industry scoring, Balance Scorecard, and then we took a look at my teams and the top 10. If I were a student, we would go to a similar area. So I'm going to log in to Team Andrews in the sim. What I'm going to do is go to reports. Now the first distinction we might want to make is that students have industry reports and they have debrief reports. The scorecard is going to be one of these debrief reports. It's giving students feedback after the round has taken place. The industry reports are really designed for here's what we need in order to make our decisions. So this would have the annual newspaper from the year before, any annual reports, the industry conditions report. I'm sure these are things that we've mentioned in some of the previous webinars that we've done. The debrief reports are all designed to give feedback to the students. So you'll notice there's quite a few reports here. Instructors are typically using one, maybe two of these assessment methods, but in about 3 out of 4 courses, the way that the instructor determines the winner and loser in the sim would be via this Balance Scorecard. So once I've clicked on the Balance Scorecard as this particular team, the first difference you probably notice is that we only see Team Andrews. This is by design. Only the instructor has access to all of the team's Balance Scorecard information. The students will only see what's relevant to their team, And of course, if they click on these scores, they get the same breakdown that we were looking at on the professor side. The only difference is what teams they can see. I'm going to pause for a second and see if there are any questions. Just as a reminder, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. The Balance Scorecard is fairly straightforward. You know, it's out of 1,000 points. The first 8 rounds, if we look at the possible points, they add up to 760. The remaining 240 points come from that recap score. So, you know, again, the best advice you can give a student would be to focus on the objectives for this round. Once we see the results, we can take a closer look, see where we did well and where we may have missed out on some points. In round 1, it looks like margins were a little low in this particular game, but ultimately we can observe what happened after the fact and use this information to help guide us as we're making decisions for the next round. Now there's one final thing I want to show you. Let me get logged in as the professor again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to restart this simulation, and once it's reset, what I want to do is I want to log into a team as a student and show you how the pro forma reports work. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the pro forma balance scorecard. So I've just reset the simulation and put it back in round 1. Now I'm going to log into this Andrews team, and we're going to get into the simulation. So I'm just going to go to Decisions and then launch the web spreadsheet. At this point, I'm seeing exactly what a student would see if they opened up round 1. Now, just as a quick overview, as I'm sure you're well aware, students are making decisions underneath this Decisions tab. Essentially, they start from the top with R&D, and they'll work their way down to the finance department. Next to the decisions, there are these pro formas. Now, pro formas are like if-then statements. So if my decisions come true, then this is what everything would look like at the end of the year. Now, the important takeaway there is that these projections are only as accurate as the decisions that the student input. The point isn't to make the projection look great. We want the projection to look great and be realistic. So when we look at this, we have a good idea of where we could improve on the scorecard. At a glance, it looks like anywhere where we see red is somewhere we'd want to take a closer look. And of course, if it's in yellow, this is only partial credit. There's room for improvement here as well. Now, keep in mind that nobody is going to get all of the points on the scorecard. I've been at CAPSIM for about 11 years, and the closest I've seen anybody get is about 960 out of 1,000, which put that student obviously in the top 1%. But the 50th percentile of students is right around 600 out of 1,000. Better than 700 is about the top 1/3 of students. Better than 800 is roughly the top 5%, and higher than 900 would put you in the top 1% of all students. Now, those numbers will change over time. Remember, they always reflect the previous semester, but keep in mind that it's usually pretty close to those numbers that I just gave you. And if I were teaching the course, this is something that I would always curve based on how that particular class was doing. You know, if everybody is above 700, I'd be a little more lenient than if everybody was under 500. But, you know, this is all at the discretion of the instructor. So Taking a look at the pro forma, we do see a few areas in red. So as this team was going through making their decisions, one that I see is that profits and margins are both lower than they should be. As I was going through making decisions here, I may need to, increase the price a few dollars and, update our forecast. And once we've made a few edits to our decisions, we can take a look at that projection again and see, if these decisions came true, how would this have impacted my scorecard? Well, unfortunately, margins are still pretty low. This tells me that I need to think of some ways to produce my product for less money moving forward, unless I want to continue increasing my price, which, of course, would have some drawbacks in terms of how much we would sell. But in this scenario, our profits have gone from a 1.1 out of 9 up to a 7.1. So if that forecast was accurate for the new price that I had input, it looks like the results would be better than they were before. We've gone from about a 40 out of 82 up to almost 45. So the students can see the cause and effect of their decisions on this balance scorecard. Similarly, they are given reports for things like the balance sheet, the income statement. We can see how things would look if these decisions came true. But in its most basic sense, these are if-then statements. If our decisions come true, then what we see in the pro formas is what would happen. So I wouldn't expect an exact match, but you can at least see the cause and effect of the different decisions you are making. So just to recap, we've gone over the balance scorecard. We've taken a look at what's available on the professor side and the student side. The biggest difference here is that on the professor side, if we look at the teams, we can of course see every team. And now that I have reset that simulation, we can't take a look at all 8 rounds like we did before. But ultimately, when we go to the scorecard, we'll see our teams in this class. We can click on any of the scores, see how they rank, whether it was decent or poor. We'll see how the teams did, and they can use this feedback to help improve their performance moving forward. I'm going to take a look and see if we've gotten any more questions. It does look like we have at least one. So we have a question from an instructor asking what drives the customer accessibility score. The customer accessibility score is driven by the sales budget. Now, in the simulation, there's a marketing department where students are investing in promotion to drive up their customer awareness. They're also investing in their sales budget to improve their customer accessibility. So think of this as how easily can customers find my product? Now, of these two, I would say it's definitely easier for students to score more points for awareness than for accessibility. The simple reason is that you get more bang for your buck on the promotion budget than you do the sales budget. So, as students are making their decisions, let me go back to that original industry here. So as students are making their decisions, they can see the impact on the scorecard. The sales budget might be something that requires a couple years of heavy investing before they see any major impact. And I know this is a pretty big pop-up here. It's actually the biggest in the spreadsheet, but at the bottom, we can see the formula. It tells us we lose about 1/3 of our accessibility each year. If we spent $1 million, it would add 7%. $2 million adds 22. $3 million would add 32, and $4.5 million would add 35. So, we can see in our reports exactly how much accessibility we had to start the year. This would be the end of round 0 we're looking at. So let's call it 40%. We would take away a third, so we'd start the year with about 27%, and then we can use this formula to figure out what would happen at different sales budgets. Now, while we're talking about it, I should say that the promotion budget applies to the product. This determines the awareness for whatever product we're inputting this decision for. The sales budget applies to the market segment. So if I do have more than one product within a particular market segment, keep in mind that the sales budget is actually applying to that segment and not to the product. So if we did have two products in the same segment, we could split whatever we wanted to spend on the sales budget between those two or more products. Now, I mentioned that the bang for your buck is a little less on the sales budget. Just for reference, we can see with promotion, again, we lose a third of what we had, but the first million would add 22%, second million 23%, and the third million is only 5%. So we have all the information we need to make these decisions built into the spreadsheet just by observing what's in the pop-ups. And whatever we input for our sales budget, let's see if we can earn some points if we invest the full $3 million. If we go to the Balance Scorecard, we'll see for customer accessibility, it's not great, but we're moving in the right direction. It's gone from 0 up to 1.1. Okay, let me see if there are any other questions. And for those of you that weren't able to attend live, and those of you that are, if you do think of questions after we conclude our webinar today, feel free to email any questions to support@capsim.com. You can also give us a call at 877-477-8787. Now I'm going to briefly go back to the CAPSIM homepage, show you the events section. We do have a tab for our webinars here. There's professor webinars, student webinars, and also the recorded webinars. So underneath student or professor webinars, you can look at the webinars that have already been recorded. Right now, we've just concluded the Measure and Monitor webinar, but if you do need to register for any upcoming webinars, you simply click on the link here and it will bring up the registration form where you can register for the upcoming webinars. Again, any questions, feel free to contact support. I'm going to take one last glance at the questions to see if any more have come in. It looks like we've already gotten to most of these, but remember, if you don't play all 8 rounds, you can still look at those overall rankings to determine how well a team performed up against their peers from around the globe. There is no customizing the metrics. Everybody is using the same scorecard. That's why we're able to provide these sort of rankings. And students can see the score. You could hide it if you wish in the report availability area. I'd like to thank you all for attending today. Hope you have a great weekend. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact support@capsim.com, or you can give us a call at 877-477-8787. Have a good one. Bye.